Hello everyone and welcome to Newegg TV. My name is Paul. Today I am going to be doing an unboxing and overview of two video cards from HIS. They are the same, yet different. The things that are the same about them are they're both based on AMD GPUs. They're both part of the R9 series, which means they're in the middle to upper tier of AMD's offerings. And they're both made by HIS. The differences we will explore right now. We're going to start with the R9 280 and some pertinent specs from the box. First off, this does feature the boost clock, and this one is actually a little bit overclocked from the reference specs. It will run at 953 megahertz on the GPU core clock. It features PCI Express Gen 3 compatibility, 3 gigabytes of GDDR5 memory that's integrated, and we have support for 4K and 2K resolutions via the display outputs on the back. The R9 280's GPU also features 1,792 stream processors, and it's built on a 28nm process. This particular graphics card features the Qx2 Cooler, as you can see listed right there. Very unique cooling design, and although it is fairly large, I can also verify that this is an effective cooler. I have not tested this card specifically, but I have run benchmarks with the previous variant of this, and I can tell you it's a really effective cooler. It's going to keep your GPU temperatures very low, and that means you can do overclocking and that sort of thing. Also some information here about not touching the graphics card while it's hot. And then apart from that, in the bottom we have an HIS little booklet here with some documentation information. Driver disk, which chances are is outdated by the time you get this, so download the latest drivers from AMD's website. You get a little HIS sticker. And then finally, the ever-present VGA to DVI adapter. Now this is a fairly large card. To prove it, I will use this ruler to make a measurement. And as you can see, if you measure the actual cooling unit itself, it's a little bit longer than 11 inches. I would say give it 11 1/4 to 11 1/2 inches total, just to make sure that you have space in your computer case. The PCB on the back is not quite as long. You can see the cooler actually extends out a bit beyond that, but again, you're going to want to make sure that you have room for that. Also, you have some extra vertical height. If you look at the bracket here, the heat pipes extend out a little bit over the top of that as well. Usually that's not something that's as much of a concern, but it is something to be aware of if you're planning to put this in a lower profile HTPC case or something like that. Now the cooler, as I've already mentioned, does a very good job, and I can say that because I've tested other variants of this. The R9 280 is actually still using the Tahiti GPU that was also used in the R9 7950, so this is roughly equivalent to that card. And in fact, if you have a 7950, you can still crossfire it with the R9 280. The GPUs are really that similar. The 280 just has a slightly higher clock speed and a slightly higher TDP. The cooler uses a round impeller fan right here. The unique part of it is that since it's raised up off the surface of the PCB here, there's actually a gap in between there, and that means that it can pull air from either side, both through right here as well as from the top. It will push the air down across the aluminum fins, which are in this section, and then dissipate it primarily out the back of the card. You can see all of the exhaust ports right there. And the cooling from the GPU is aided by the heat pipes you can see right there. You've got a total of 4, a couple 6mm and a couple 8mm heat pipes that are going down there directly over the part where the GPU resides. You'll also notice this long black piece that goes along the length of the card right here. It's actually secured at this end of the card on the bracket, which is going to be the sturdiest part, and that's going to help provide a bit of extra rigidity to the card and also make sure that you don't have any sag over time, since these cards do tend to weigh quite a bit. Down here at this end we have the power connectors, and you've got an 8-pin and a 6-pin PCI Express graphics or PEG connectors, so make sure you've got those available from your power supply, and HIS is recommending a 750 watt power supply for this card and the rest of your system. They've also added some additional cooling. You can see just underneath there, those are just some finned heat sinks that are on top of the VRMs that provide power to the CPU and the memory. I'm sorry, the GPU and the memory. There's also extra contact down there over the memory chips themselves. The memory, again, you get 3 gigabytes of GDDR5. It's on a 384-bit bus. That's 5 gigabits per second memory speed, and again, the TDP on this card, 250 watts, so make sure that your power supply has the juice to handle it. PCB on the back is a light, I'll say sort of a greenish blue color, so if you are going for continuity with your build, you might have a difficult time locating a motherboard that's that same color, but This card is much more, I think, about the performance than necessarily the aesthetics. Down here you have your PCI Express Gen 3 connector that is backwards compatible with PCI Express Gen 2, so if you're buying this card as an upgrade and you don't have the fanciest, newest motherboard, you'll still get plenty of performance out of that. There's really not a huge difference going from Gen 2 to Gen 3. You also have some crossfire fingers right up here on the top. 2 of those because this card can actually do up to 4-way crossfire configurations, so if you're going for a multi-card solution, that is possible. However, do bear in mind that this is slightly wider than a 2-slot card, so chances are you're probably only going to be able to go up to 3-way unless you're going to be replacing the cooler or you have some crazy PCI Express extensions or something to that effect. Lastly, we will talk about the video outs, and for that you've got a couple mini DisplayPort connectors, so bear in mind you may need adapters for those, but that is going to be your best option if you're going for 4K resolution because DisplayPort can natively do 4K at 60 Hz. You also have HDMI 1.4 that can do 4K at 30 Hz, so that's good for video playback and gaming, but chances are you're going to want a higher refresh rate available if you are playing at 4K. This can still do 1080 just fine at 60 Hz, so don't worry if you have a 1080 monitor. Those are much more common these days anyway. Finally, you've got a dual Link Dvi Out, and that can do resolutions up to 2560 by 1600 at 60 Hz. And since this is a double unboxing video, we have our second card here. That's the Radeon R9 290X. This is also part of the R9 family. However, this uses the Hawaii GPU that was famously launched along with the 290 and 290X graphics cards. That means although it uses the same GCN architecture as the 280 we just showed you, it's a much larger die, which means basically you get more horsepower overall. Again, PCI Express Gen 3 compatibility. You get 4 gigs of GDDR5 memory with this one, and then pretty much all of the compatibility that you saw with the 280. And I do want to point out that for this card as well as the 280, you can access the iTurbo software that HIS provides, and you can use that for overclocking your graphics card as well as monitoring it. Now our 290X is using the Qx2 Cooler, as you can see right there, so definitely a strikingly different look than the Qx Cooler from the R9 280, but I will give you guys a measurement once again. By the way, everything else in the box is pretty much the same as the 280 as far as accessories and whatnot. Again, measuring the length of the cooler itself, you can see it's just around 11 3/4 inches. I would give yourself as much as 12 inches of clearance in your case, again, just to make sure that you can fit the card to get it into and out of your system when you're actually doing the build, so bear that in mind. Again, the cooler does extend a little bit beyond the length of the PCB itself, but again here, this is a cooler that I have used before, although not necessarily with this specific card right here, and I can say that it's very effective. I used it with the HIS 7970, which did a very good job of keeping that GPU cool, and thankfully we've seen aftermarket coolers now, such as this one with the R9 290X, because that's one of the things that was most requested when that card first launched, was coolers to do a little bit better job than AMD's reference cooler. Apart from the gold trim you can see on the top, you also see that same turquoise PCB on the bottom, but HIS has also added a back plate to provide a bit of extra protection and also give you something else to look at when you have the card actually installed in your system. The Qx2 Cooler here is a slight variant on the ones we've seen before. They've added this bit of extra protection right here for the heat pipes, you can see there. They do still have 3 heat pipes. Actually, I'm sorry, make that 5 heat pipes, 3 on this side and 2 on the opposite side, an 8mm and 6mm variants. And as you can see, that plate is just providing some support around them, and that does add a bit of extra height to the card as well, so you can see right there. Just make sure from the height of the card to the height of the cooler, you're going to have enough room in your case once again. Down here at this end, we can see the power connectors that are required. Again, 2 PEG PCI Express graphics connectors, but this time you need 2 8-pin connectors for this particular card. And according to the retail box, a 500 watt or greater power supply will be sufficient for this. Now, if you were watching the 280 part, you might have said, well, that's a 750 watt requirement, but I'm just going off of what it says on the box. 750 watt might actually be overkill for the 280, but for the 290X here, 500 watt or greater, and I can verify that is in line with AMD's requirements for this card. The fin array on this particular card is, I think, what helps it with cooling the most. You can see a massive fin array. This is just half of it over on this side, the other half of it is on the other side, and that cooling is accomplished by the downward firing fans. You can see 2 of them side by side right there. The fans, unless they're spinning at full speed, do stay nice and quiet, at least in my testing of other cards with this particular cooler on it. And then there's also the option right here here of this tiny switch, and that will enable or disable Uber mode depending on which position it is in, and that will basically allow the fan to go up all the way to 100% if it's in Uber mode, and that will potentially allow for some additional overclocking, or it will limit the fan's rotation if you have it in the other position to give you a bit more of a balance between cooling and noise generated. The PCB itself is a custom design by HIS, and again you can see that backplate on it. The GPU resides right there at the center. On the opposite side you can see some of those heat pipes coming out once again, providing some heat dissipation over into the fin arrays. The cooler on the top, or at least the shroud, is that blingy gold color, which you've probably already noticed by now. And this card does still maintain the extra support right in there. Although it doesn't come right up to the edge of the card, you can kind of see that black piece right there of metal, and that does come down and go along the length of the card to provide some cooling for some of the VRMs and memory that it covers, as well as again some extra rigidity since this is a fairly sizable and larger card. Down at the bottom you got your PCI Express Gen 3 connector, and then down on this end we have our video outs once again, and this time they've gone with a couple dual Link Dvi outs. And then we also have that HDMI out, again with the same resolution available. And then we have a full-size DisplayPort out, which I like because it means you don't need to necessarily use an adapter. Apart from that, just to read you off some additional specs, the GPU core clock on this one is going to be running at 1 GHz, which is the reference clock for the 290X. However, again, that's easily overclockable if you want to try out the iTurbo software from HIS or any of the other overclocking softwares that are available. You can even use the AMD Catalyst Control Center to overclock AMD's graphics cards as well. You get 2,816 stream processors. That gives you a total compute performance of 5.6 teraflops, 176 texture units, 64 raster operators, and then the 4 GB of memory on this card is operating on a 512-bit memory interface that gives you a data rate of up to 5 gigabits per second, or a total bandwidth of 320 gigabytes per second. So once again, this has been the HIS Radeon R9 290X with the ICE Qx2 Cooler, as well as the HIS Radeon R9 280 with the ICE Q Cooler, two cards that are similar but different at the same time. And speaking of similar but different, AMD has recently lowered the prices for a lot of their Radeon GPUs, so definitely check out the links in this video's description for the pricing over on Newegg.com. I think particularly for the R9 280, you'll find it to be quite a compelling deal. I'm Paul with Newegg TV. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button while you're down there clicking on the links, and we'll see you all next time.